Welcome to The Explainer. All right, today we're jumping right into Blazor. It's a framework that's been making a lot of waves because it lets .NET developers build slick, modern web apps using the one language they already know inside and out, C#. You know, this quote from Chris Sainty, who literally wrote the book on Blazor, it nails it. It gets right to the core of why Blazor even exists. For so long, C# devs kind of had to sit on the sidelines when it came to modern client-side web dev. This quote speaks right to that feeling. So let's paint a picture here. For the longest time, web development in the .NET world had this split personality, right? You'd be building all your powerful, robust backend logic in C#, but the second you wanted to create a rich, interactive experience for the user, you had to slam on the brakes, switch gears, and jump into a completely different universe, the universe of JavaScript. And what did that really mean? It meant that .NET developers had to become experts in a whole other ecosystem. They had to learn the ins and outs of frameworks like Angular, React, or Vue.js, each with its own way of doing things, its own tooling. It just created this huge disconnect in the whole development process. So, how does Blazor solve this big puzzle? Well, here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to look at what Blazor actually is, dive into its fundamental building blocks, we call them components, then explore the two really powerful ways it can run, server and WebAssembly. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the big question: why should you care? Okay, let's get into it. What exactly is this new solution? Well, Blazor was basically introduced as the missing piece of the whole .NET puzzle. It was engineered to be that bridge, the thing that finally connects the server and client worlds for all those .NET developers out there. To put it simply, Blazor is a framework that lets you build interactive web UIs using C# instead of JavaScript. And the real magic here is that it doesn't need any weird browser plugins or special extensions. It's all built on open web standards that every single modern browser already gets. All right, so how do you actually build something with Blazor? The answer lies in a concept that's at the heart of pretty much all modern web development. You build with components. Honestly, the best way to wrap your head around this is to think of a component as a self-contained, reusable piece of your user interface, kind of like a Lego block. You just assemble all these different blocks, a header component here, a menu component there, to build out your entire application from the ground up. Now, this approach is just incredibly powerful. It makes your code reusable, right? Build a fancy button once, use it everywhere. It's way easier to maintain. Just change the design in one file and boom, it updates across your entire app. And because each component is encapsulated with its own logic and can be nested inside others, you can build super complex UIs out of simple, easy-to-manage parts. And check this out. This is what a component looks like in the wild. This is a classic counter from a brand new Blazor project. See how it's all in a single .razor file? You've got your HTML for the structure right at the top, and then your C# logic down in that @code block to make the button actually do something. It's just so clean and organized. So now we know what we're building with, but we've got to talk about how it all runs. And this is a really big deal in the Blazor world. It's called the hosting model. It's a choice you have to make that decides where your C# code is actually going to execute. You basically have two main flavors to choose from. First up is Blazor WebAssembly, where all of your C# code runs right inside the user's browser. Then there's Blazor Server, where the code stays on your server and UI updates are just streamed to the browser over a live connection. Let's break those down. So with Blazor WebAssembly, the user's browser downloads your entire application. And that download includes your app's code, sure, but it also includes a tiny version of the .NET runtime that's been compiled to something called WebAssembly, which is basically a format that all modern browsers can run super fast. It all just executes right there in the browser. The huge win here is that you can build real single-page apps that can even work offline. You're offloading all the work to the client's machine, so you can host your app on cheap, simple, static file services. But there's always a trade-off, right? The main one here is a bigger initial download, which might mean a slightly longer wait time the very first time a user visits your site. Blazor Server is a totally different beast. The app lives and breathes on your server. The browser just keeps a lightweight, constant connection open using a technology called SignalR. So when a user clicks a button, that little event zips up to the server figures out what changed, and then it sends only the tiny UI update back down to the client. So what's the upside? A tiny initial download and a lightning-fast startup time. Plus, all your important business logic stays safe and sound on your server. The catch? Well, it needs a constant, stable internet connection. If the user's network gets a little shaky, the UI can start to feel a bit sluggish. Okay, we've seen the building blocks, we've seen how it runs, but what's the big payoff? Why would you, as a developer, actually choose to build your next big thing with Blazor? You know, it really all boils down to this. Blazor unifies your entire tech stack. You get to write C# from the database all the way to the pixels on the user's screen. This means you can share code, like your data models and validation rules, between the client and the server, which is huge. You tap into the massive, mature .NET ecosystem and its amazing tools. And if you're already a .NET developer, the learning curve is practically a flat line. You can be productive on day one. On top of all that, the performance with WebAssembly can be incredible, almost like a native desktop app, thanks to something called ahead-of-time compilation. Ultimately, Blazor is bridging a divide that has existed for a very, very long time. It creates this single, cohesive development experience. And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. By finally unifying the front end and the back end in a single language, could Blazor be the future of what it means to build for the web on .NET?